Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out more from Extra History. But before we get started, I do want to give a shout out to the newest channel member. Thank you to bruh7/Kamerovsky_KCM. Thank you for becoming a channel member, and if any of you want to become a channel member, you can do so by clicking the link in the description box below. Now, let's get back into the main video. So here we are back with some more Extra History. So I did a poll a little while, it feels like forever ago at this point, but I did a poll with a bunch of Extra History series on it, and this is the one that won. This is the one that you guys wanted me to check out. Justinian and Theodora, and it's a long one, so buckle up everybody, we're in for a ride. So if you want to check out that poll, you can see the order of the next handful of series I'm going to be doing. So whatever happened to be second place, I don't remember which one it was, that one is going to be after I finish the incredibly long Justinian and Theodora series. So I probably shouldn't waste too much time with introductions, but what do I know about Justinian and Theodora, I guess is the thing. Not much. I took a class on the Middle Ages which covered them significantly, but I've kind of blocked out that class. I had a hard time. I had a friend who was really into Justinian, like oddly into Justinian, which was interesting. I know that Theodora is, it's a weird word, unprecedented. Maybe that's not the best word, but like unusually powerful and influential for a woman in her time, and that they are quite the pair. So there's something here, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about it. Maybe I'll absorb it a little bit better than I did in that class that I took where I suffered and barely made it through the whole thing. So we'll see how it works. Let's get it started.
The West has fallen. Britannia was abandoned centuries ago. Gaul is overrun by the Franks. Hispania is a Visigothic province now, and North Africa has fallen to the Vandals. Worst of all, Italy and the
Is this the first episode?
has become an
It is.
Gothic
Cool.
kingdom. Only the East still stands. But even in the East, Huns and Bulgars press in on the north, and in the south, war rages with the mighty Sassanid Empire. Not even Anatolia, the heart of the empire, home of Constantinople herself, is safe. And yet today, all around us, we see the legacy of Eastern Rome. In the heart of Istanbul stands the Hagia Sophia. Its great domes housed the largest cathedral in the world for 1,000 years, and even now, 1,500 years after its construction, it stands as a wonder for us all. Every day in courtrooms half the world over, decisions are made rooted in the legal framework laid out in the Corpus Juris Civilis. And in the apse of the Basilica in San Vitale, if you look up, you will see the most renowned emperor of the East looking down on you from a mosaic nearly 1,500 years old.
So I'm curious, like, I wasn't expecting this level of framing. At first I thought, wait, is this actually episode 1? It feels like this is recapping stuff that they've explained to us. But nope, it's just got a heavy, complex geopolitical system that has to be laid out before we can actually get into the stuff we're really talking about. I'm curious if they're actually going to be doing some of the framing that will like go into modern day and being able to bridge people like Justinian and Theodora. Clearly she's also in the title, bridge their importance to today. That's actually really interesting, and I don't think about our legal systems being rooted in that, but this is a good opportunity to learn a little bit more, so cool.
And these things that are left to us are almost all the work of one man, one emperor, Justinian. He was perhaps the greatest emperor of the Byzantines, and the last of them to dream of a restored Rome, to dream of a unified Christian church, to dream in marble and gold and steel. Never again would the Roman Empire see the heights it saw under this one man, and never again would anyone come so close to bringing the West back into the light of Rome.
I love that he's kind of gone back and forth with using the term Byzantine and using the term Rome, which I think is kind of fun. Historians have decided on the term Byzantine pretty much, just to differentiate them from the Roman Empire of old, which it's an interesting choice, and I kind of understand why they do that, because clearly from the little bits that I have learned about the Byzantine Empire, there is something so different about that from the original. However, the way that it's divided up, like, we don't do that to a lot of other places that have culturally distinct eras or something. There was something so unique about the Byzantine era of the Roman Empire. There was something so complex about that it got its own distinction. The Romans of the time did not call themselves the Byzantine Empire. They saw themselves as the Roman Empire. And that's something that I always found very fascinating, because it seems like an anomaly among history. Like, nothing like on this scale has gotten that treatment quite like the Romans / Byzantines have.
But Justinian's legacy is mixed. Unlike those heroic emperors who kept Rome and then Byzantium from being forever extinguished when complete collapse looked inevitable, Justinian took an empire that was beset on all sides but still strong and raised it to magnificence. But in doing so, he may have gambled too many of its resources, expended too much of its strength on a dream. Justinian is one of my favorite Roman emperors because he had the boldness to dream in a way that no one else did, and he had the energy, the drive, and the capacity to back up those dreams. He was intelligent, wise, diligent beyond measure, working tirelessly for his people, but his reign was not without blood, not without miscalculations, and not without human failings and distrust. And so for the next few weeks, we'll dive into the reign of this most spectacular emperor, and his renowned empress, Theodora. But before we can get to Justinian and...
The introduction is telling in a very interesting way. Even though this series is Justinian and Theodora, she felt kind of tacked onto that introduction. I wonder if that was like on purpose, or if it just comes from this guy's particular love for Justinian that causes him to be like the focus of the intro. That's actually an interesting touch there. I'm curious how that's going to play out.
And Theodora, we have to talk about Justin, the uncle to Justinian, without whom Justinian may never have been. Because before Justinian was an emperor, he was a peasant. And before he was Justinian, he was Flavius Petrus Sabatius. He changed his name to honor his uncle and benefactor, Justin. Justin's one of those wild American dream sort of stories. He himself began as a peasant farmer in a remote western corner of the empire. He spoke Latin in a world that had become almost entirely Greek and owned nothing but the clothes on his back. But despite all this, he made his way to that monumental city, the heart of the empire, Byzantium, and sought his fortune. He joined the army and was assigned to the palace guard. He quickly rose through the ranks, and as he did so, he brought his family to join him.
That is kind of the typical story for a lot of people who rise from nothing. Like, even in civilizations where there isn't a whole lot of upward mobility, there is often that one exception in the military. The military is one of those like few things, like, okay, normally you don't go from like being peasant or like lower class, whatever the equivalent is in a given civilization, and move up to middle or upper, especially not upper. No, those smelly lower people don't end up in upper. But military service is like the one exception that gets people consistently from lower ranks to higher ranks. It doesn't happen to everybody. It doesn't even happen to most people. But when you see somebody rise up, like, yeah, it is often through things like military service or some of the less dignified positions that would surround the royal types and the noble types and the upper class types. Some people will rise up through those positions. So yeah, okay.
No children of his own, he doted on his nephew, young Flavius Petrus Sabatius. And
Flavius.
Justin was an illiterate farmer. He was determined to give his young nephew Sabatius the finest education in law, theology, and rhetoric. He also made sure to get Sabatius appointed to the royal guard, and in gratitude, Sabatius took on the name Justinianus, or as we call him, Justinian. Then Justin, and by extension Justinian's big break came. When the Emperor Anastasius, the emperor who Justin served, died, he left the throne without an heir, and a succession crisis began. Justin, at this point being the head of the Excubitors, or the Imperial Guard, and thus...
We've run into, it feels like so many legitimacy crises in our journey through extra history. It might not have even been that many, but it's always fun to see how these things resolve, because like, it's amazing how many emperors and kings and whatever die without having an heir. And that's like the first rule when you are a monarch, emperor, whatever word you want to attach to it. That's the first rule. You have a male heir. That is like the one thing you got to do. Like, there's all the little other duties. They come second to making sure that the line of succession is clear. Like, the further back you go, you kind of get it more and more, because like a lot of children die before they reach maturity and whatever and little stuff. But every once in a while you catch a leader that just firing blanks or something, and I don't know what his situation was, but it's always interesting.
Thus, the only guy with troops in the capital city was going to be essential to deciding who the next emperor would be. So one of the imperial officials tried to bribe Justin in order to get him to support their favored candidate. But Justin, probably at the suggestion of Justinian, promptly took the bribe and used it to bribe influential senators to support him instead. As he had the only troops in town and the support of
That's genius.
Justin was raised to the imperial purple. But Justin had no education. He only had experience as a soldier and a swineherd, and he realized he would need help running the empire. Doubly so because he was seen by many as less legitimate than the nephews of the previous emperor, who were still...
Oh yeah, he has like no legitimacy, really. Like that's like a straight up like coup, in a sense. A coup against who? Who would have knew? I don't know. Who knew? Who knows? I can't rhyme. But yeah, like who would it really be against? Who even has a claim? Hopefully we get to talk about some like actual legitimate rivals here, because that I would hope that's what we have. I forgot that Justinian had humble roots. Maybe that's why he sounds so cool. There is something fun about started from the bottom type story.
Alive. And for this help, he turned to Justinian. Justinian rapidly went to work, closing the rift between the church in Rome and the Byzantine church, an act which lent legitimacy to Justin's reign, while at the same time pardoning and promoting the most talented men who the previous emperor had imprisoned or condemned, securing Justin loyalty within the palace. Next, Justinian had to secure Justin's new reign on a military front, so he also made peace with a popular general named Vitalian, who had rebelled against the religious policies of Justin's predecessor.
He sounds familiar.
Had an army inside Byzantine borders. Unfortunately, Vitalian was a little too popular, and in an act which displays the ruthlessness that Justinian tried to avoid, but
it's an assassin.
Above, Justinian had Vitalian assassinated shortly after he returned to Byzantium. Because Justinian was a man who just did everything at once, it was also about this time that he met Theodora. Theodora was intelligent, witty, charming, and always the center of attention wherever she went. But she was also an actress, and as was common for actresses at this time, had worked as a prostitute and an escort. So how did this former escort meet the man who was second only to the emperor himself?
That's actually especially interesting. Like, the fact that she's coming from a more interesting background as well. I can see why this pair is so intriguing to people. Like, the fact that she worked as a prostitute, there's an interesting thing with prostitutes throughout history. Often, in the case of women, they would have a lot more power than the typical woman because they have their own income, which a lot of women did not have the luxury of. And that's something that separated them from the typical women of the time. So knowing that she had like a strange level of power and influence for a woman at the time, and coming from that sort of a background, perhaps it's something to do with that. Like, she's used to having a little bit more control of her own destiny in a sense. Maybe maybe it has something to do with it. I don't know if the comparison's perfect, because I don't know if prostitution was the same, and I don't know if she was fully independent in that case. Who knows?
Well, she was an ardent supporter of the blue faction of the Demes. What the heck is a Deme, you might ask? The Demes were the chariot racing teams in Constantinople, and this may sound crazy, but they are absolutely essential to understanding Byzantine history. They played an enormous role in the life of the average citizen of Constantinople. You can think of them as a sports club, a political organization, a community group, and a moving riot all rolled into one. By the time of Justinian, the chariot races were basically the sport in Constantinople. With the rise of Christianity, gladiatorial combat was functionally outlawed, so everyone, and I mean everyone, turned out for the chariot races. The Hippodrome, the arena for chariot races in Constantinople, could seat over 100,000 people. Just think about that. Even by today's standards, that would make it one of the biggest stadiums in the world. And think about what 100,000 people all in one place means for a city like Constantinople.
That attendance is absolutely mind-blowing. I think of like a comparable event. I'm a big fan of professional wrestling. 100,000 people, I think like the biggest WrestleMania, which is a highly attended event. And unlike, I think that it gets more attendance than like football stuff because you can pack more people into like a large stadium with just like a wrestling ring in the middle than like a giant football field. And those like get around, I believe like some of the highest ones were like a little over 100,000. So this is comparable to like one of the larger sporting events of today. So that's kind of insane. I'd imagine people were a little bit bored back then, and this was just like the thing, this 1, 2, 3, and the place to be, you know?
If those folks all decide they want something, it's going to be very hard to turn them down. And the two teams, the Blues and the Greens, were not only sports clubs, but also organized political agitation. The average member of each of the teams was basically a soccer hooligan, always ready for a riot, which meant that the upper echelons of society would use the deems to promote their political agendas. Thus, through the deems, sometimes the highest and lowest members of society would meet. And thus, Justinian met Theodora. Justinian was a fanatical supporter of the Blues, often using his political clout to protect them from the law. The Blues served as a power base for him in the city, and in turn, he had the constabulary turn a blind eye when members of the Blues were involved in coercion or extortion or occasionally outright banditry. Through the Blues, Justinian and Theodora met and instantly fell in love. And although they lived together, they couldn't marry because there was a law against government officials marrying actresses, a law which he would get his uncle to repeal.
We can change that.
Had the power to do so. Unfortunately for Justinian and Theodora, Justin's wife, much as she loved her nephew, wouldn't let him repeal this law. But shortly after her death, the law was wiped from the books, and Justinian and Theodora became husband and wife.
Sad, but
Justin followed his wife shortly thereafter, dying on the 1st of August, 527, leaving the empire in the sole hands of Justinian. Join us next time as we watch Justinian burst into action, see him implement all those plans he'd been dreaming of for years as his uncle's subordinate, meet the men Justinian employed to enact his grand project, and witness the true power of the Deems as 100,000 howling citizens nearly bring the reign of Justinian to an end.
Oh, there we go. I didn't realize how quick this was going to be moving. There's like 12 episodes of this and he's already emperor. That's kind of insane to me. I was assuming that it would take a few episodes for him to even become emperor. And then it would be like a kind of a slow build, but no, he's already there. This, I'd imagine at this pacing, must be quite the action-packed story because it really has moved pretty darn quickly considering how much time they have seemingly set aside for this series. I think it was like 12 episodes, something like that. We're gonna have to do these pretty often to make sure this doesn't last forever. So I will get around to doing more of these very soon. You're gonna be seeing a whole lot of them. We're gonna run through Justinian and Theodora. This might be one of the most popular series. I don't know. I haven't gauged them from like views or whatever. I'm just going based on like what you guys have requested and told me and how it performed in the poll. And while it got like a plurality, it's kind of hard to gauge. It got like 33%, but there was like 5 things on there, so I would expect it to be a plurality rather than a majority. So I don't know exactly how popular this is, though. I guess we'll see how the videos do. That's usually how I gauge it. So thank you guys for watching this one, and I will be back with part 2 very soon. All right, thank you.